Listen carefully, because not every cry for help is a call from God. Not every opportunity to assist is an assignment from heaven. Compassion without discernment can drain your purpose, delay your destiny, and distort God's order for your life. There are moments when helping is holy and moments when helping becomes harmful. Wisdom is knowing the difference. God never called you to rescue people from lessons He Himself designed to teach them. He never asked you to override His discipline, interrupt His process, or replace personal responsibility with misplaced mercy. When help is given outside of God's order, it doesn't heal, it enables. And enabling keeps people stuck while it pulls you down with them. Here is the warning. First, do not help those who refuse to help themselves. God honors effort. When someone consistently avoids responsibility, ignores opportunities, and expects others to carry what they refuse to lift, your help becomes a crutch, not a cure. Second, do not help those who repeatedly reject wisdom. Advice has power only when it's received. When someone keeps asking for guidance but never applies it, they are not seeking direction, they are seeking validation. Third, do not help those who blame everyone else for their condition. Accountability is the doorway to change. If a person cannot own their role, they are not ready for rescue. Fourth, do not help those who mock correction. Correction is protection. When someone despises discipline, your help will only strengthen their rebellion. Fifth, do not help those who misuse your kindness. Kindness is not permission for exploitation. When generosity is abused, it must be guarded, not multiplied. 6, do not help those who refuse God's order. God works through principles. When someone wants the blessing without alignment, the provision without obedience, your help fights against heaven's design. 7, do not help those who create chaos everywhere they go. Peace is a sign of God's presence. Constant disorder is often a sign of unaddressed character issues. 8, do not help those who manipulate with guilt, fear, or pressure. God leads through truth, not emotional control. Manipulation is not desperation, it's deception. 9th, do not help those who are unwilling to change. Transformation requires surrender. If someone loves their pattern more than their progress, your help becomes wasted energy. This is not a call to be cold-hearted. This is a call to be God-led. True love operates with wisdom. True compassion partners with truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let God do what only He can do. Helping everyone can cost you everything. But helping according to God's will multiply your strength, protect your calling, and preserve your peace. So examine your life. Look at where your energy is going. Ask yourself, is this assignment from God or is this interference with His work? Today, make a decision. Choose discernment over guilt. Choose obedience over emotion. Choose purpose over pressure. Stand firm, walk wisely, help where God leads, and have the courage to stop where He says no. Not every request for help comes from heaven, and not every open door is an assignment from God. That truth alone can change how you live, how you give, and how you protect your calling. The moment you believe that every cry demands your response, you place yourself in danger of living emotionally driven instead of spiritually led. There is a difference between being compassionate and being commissioned. One is rooted in feeling, the other is rooted in obedience. If you do not learn to tell the difference, you will spend your life exhausted, frustrated, and wondering why you are always busy but never fulfilled. Here's the hook most people miss. Urgency does not equal authority. Just because someone is desperate does not mean you are designated. Need alone is not proof of divine assignment. Many people confuse pressure with purpose and guilt with guidance. They feel bad, so they act. They feel needed, so they move. But God never asked you to respond to every emotional pull. He asked you to listen for His voice. There are moments when helping feels right, but is spiritually wrong. You can be sincere and still be out of order. You can be kind and still be disobedient. When help is offered without discernment, it doesn't rescue. It redirects you away from what God actually called you to do. Every yes you give to the wrong assignment is a no to the right one. That is why discernment is not optional. It is protection. Here's another hook. Some people are not asking for help. They are asking for escape. Escape from responsibility. Escape from consequences. Escape from growth. And if you step in too early, you interrupt a process that God intentionally designed. There are lessons pain is meant to teach. And when you remove the lesson, you also remove the maturity that comes with it. Helping at the wrong time can keep someone spiritually immature while draining your strength. Discernment requires patience. God rarely shouts his will, he reveals it. If you move too quickly, you will miss the signal. Many people act first and pray later, then wonder why peace never follows their decision. When help is God-directed, peace confirms it, even if it costs you something. When help is self-directed, it comes with confusion, resentment, and exhaustion. Your spirit always knows the difference. Another hook that confronts the heart: not everyone who asks deserves access. Access is sacred. God guards access. He doesn't give everyone the same level of influence, proximity, or support. When you give people access to your time, energy, finances, or wisdom without discernment, you violate spiritual boundaries. Boundaries are not barriers to love. They are filters for assignment. Some requests come to test your emotions, not your obedience. They pull on your sympathy, your history, your fear of being misunderstood, or your desire to be needed. But God does not lead through emotional manipulation. He leads through clarity. If you constantly feel pressured instead of peaceful, pushed instead of persuaded, rushed instead of reassured, that is not divine direction. It is emotional demand. Here's a deeper hook. Being needed can become an idol. When your identity is tied to rescuing others, you will say yes, even when God says. Nor will we equate usefulness with obedience and busyness with faithfulness. But God never called you to be everyone's answer. He called you to point people to him. When you replace God's role with your own effort, you create dependency instead of deliverance. Discernment also protects your destiny. Every assignment has a cost. And when the assignment is not from God, the cost is never worth it. You will pay with your peace. You will pay with your focus. You will pay with delay. People wonder why progress feels slow, why momentum keeps stalling. Often it's because their energy is being poured into assignments God never authorized. Another hook worth confronting. Some help looks holy but produces nothing. If your help never leads to growth, accountability, or change, it is not fruit, it is maintenance. God is not interested in maintaining dysfunction. He is interested in transformation. When help aligns with God's will, it produces movement. When it doesn't, it produces cycles. Discernment does not mean you stop caring. It means you start caring correctly. It shifts your mindset from how do I fix this to what is God doing here? That question changes everything. Sometimes God is developing character. Sometimes he is exposing patterns. Sometimes he is teaching dependence on him, not on you. When you rush in without discernment, you short circuit what heaven is building. Here is another hook that challenges the fear of rejection. Obedience will not always make you popular. Some people will be offended when you don't help. Some will call you selfish, unloving, or cold. But obedience is not measured by applause. It is measured by alignment. God's approval always matters more than human opinion. Discernment also demands honesty with yourself. Are you helping because God said so, or because you are uncomfortable saying no? Are you responding to divine instruction, or are you reacting to pressure? God's assignments come with confirmation, not confusion. They come with clarity, not chaos. When you understand that not every request is God assigned, you begin to live lighter. You stop carrying what was never yours. You stop feeling responsible for outcomes God never put in your hands. You start moving with intention instead of impulse, with wisdom instead of worry, with obedience instead of obligation. This is the shift. You don't stop helping. You start helping on purpose. Compassion without wisdom can become dangerous because when help operates outside God's order, it no longer heals, it harms. That truth confronts everything people assume about kindness. Many believe that good intentions are enough, that sincerity alone guarantees righteousness, but intention without alignment can still produce destruction. You can mean well and still move wrong. You can love deeply and still interfere with what God is doing. Here is the hook that unsettles comfort. Not all help is holy. Some help actually fights against divine purpose. When God establishes an order, he does it for protection, growth, and transformation. Stepping outside that order, even with the purest heart, creates confusion instead of clarity. God is not impressed by effort that ignores his structure. Another hook that exposes reality. Mercy that ignores truth creates dependency. When you help someone without addressing the order God requires, you may relieve their discomfort but reinforce their dysfunction. Temporary relief can become long-term bondage. What feels loving in the moment may quietly destroy their ability to stand on their own. God works through principles, not pressure. He sets systems in place, sowing and reaping, responsibility and reward, obedience and blessing. When help bypasses these principles, it disrupts the spiritual ecosystem God designed. It's like pulling a seed out of the ground because you're impatient for growth. You think you're helping, but you're actually killing the process. Here's a deeper hook. Rescuing someone from consequences can rob them of character. Consequences are not cruelty. They are instructors. They teach discernment, humility, discipline, and wisdom. When help removes consequences prematurely, it delays maturity. That is why misplaced mercy can be more damaging than honest restraint. Helping outside God's order often comes from fear. Fear of seeing someone suffer. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of conflict. Fear of guilt. But fear-driven help is never faith-led help. Faith waits on God's direction. Fear rushes to fix what God may be using to form. Another hook that challenges emotions. Just because you can help does not mean you should. Ability is not authority. Resources are not permission. God gives you capacity, but he also gives you boundaries. When you ignore boundaries, you misuse capacity. Strength without direction becomes strain. When help violates God's order, it creates confusion in both lives, the one giving and the one receiving. The helper grows weary, resentful, and drained. The receiver grows entitled, stagnant, and unaccountable. What began as generosity turns into frustration. What started as love ends in burnout. Here's the uncomfortable hook. Some people feel worse after being helped because the help was never God approved. There is no peace attached to it. There is no fruit from it. It leaves a residue of tension, imbalance, and expectation. Divine help always carries clarity. Misaligned help carries weight. God's order protects everyone involved. It protects the giver from overextension and the receiver from dependency. When help aligns with God's will, it empowers people to rise. When it doesn't, it teaches them to lean. Empowerment builds strength. Enabling yields weakness. Another hook that reveals motive. Helping outside God's order can secretly feed pride. It makes you feel needed, important, irreplaceable. You become the solution instead of pointing to the source. When help becomes about your role rather than God's will, it shifts from obedience to ego. God never designed you to be the savior. That role is already taken. When you try to save people from paths God allowed, you assume responsibility you were never meant to carry. And what you were never called to carry will always feel heavy. Order also involves timing. Even the right help at the wrong time becomes wrong help. God's timing is as important as his instruction. Premature assistance can undo what patience would have produced. When God delays intervention, he is often developing resilience, wisdom, and faith. Here's another hook. Disorderly help teaches people to bypass God. If every time pressure comes you rush in, they never learn to pray, to trust, to wait, to obey. You unintentionally train them to rely on you instead of relying on Him. That is not support. That is substitution. God's order also includes accountability. Help that avoids accountability sustains cycles. It keeps the same problems repeating with different emotions. True help confronts truth, not just tears. It aligns compassion with correction. When help is given outside God's order, it drains purpose. Time meant for growth is spent maintaining chaos. Energy meant for assignment is wasted on interruption. People wonder why their spiritual progress feels stuck. It's often because their obedience is being diluted by disorderly compassion. Another hook worth sitting with, peace is the referee. When help aligns with God's order, peace governs it, even when it's difficult. When help disrupts God's order, anxiety accompanies it, even when it looks right. Peace is not emotion, it is confirmatio. God's order is never meant to suppress love, it is meant to guide it. Love without order is reckless. Order without love is rigid. But when love and order meet, transformation happens. Misaligned help feels urgent, heavy, and pressured. Aligned help feels clear, intentional, and purposeful. One leaves you tired. The other leaves you strengthened. One creates confusion. The other creates growth. Understanding this shifts how you respond. You stop reacting and start discerning. You stop fixing and start listening. You stop asking, what do they need? And start asking, what is God doing? Personal responsibility is the doorway to every real breakthrough. And without it, help becomes ineffective no matter how generous it is. Here's the hook many people avoid. God responds to movement, not excuses. When someone refuses effort, avoids accountability, or rejects ownership of their actions, no amount of external support can produce internal change. Help does not replace responsibility. It activates it. And when responsibility is missing, help collapses under its own weight. Another hook that confronts comfort. No one rises above what they are unwilling to carry. Growth always demands participation. God never designed deliverance to bypass discipline. When people want change without effort, freedom without struggle, or results without commitment, they are not ready for transformation. They are only ready for relief. Personal responsibility is proof of readiness. It signals humility, awareness, and a willingness to change. When someone takes ownership of where they are, they position themselves for where they are going. But when responsibility is rejected, help becomes an illusion. You may give time, money, advice, or energy, but nothing sticks because the foundation is missing. Here's a powerful hook. Excuses are evidence of resistance. Every excuse shifts blame outward and keeps power inwardly untouched. As long as the problem belongs to someone else, the solution can never belong to the person who needs it. That's why helping someone who refuses responsibility feels like pouring water into a cracked vessel. It leaks faster than it fills. God honors effort because effort demonstrates faith in action. Responsibility does not mean perfection. It means participation. It means showing up even when it's hard, owning mistakes without justification, and choosing growth over comfort. When someone refuses even the smallest step, it reveals a deeper issue, not inability, but unwillingness. Another hook that exposes reality. People who avoid responsibility often disguise it as victimhood. Pain may be real, injustice may be real, and struggle may be real. But remaining powerless is a choice. Responsibility does not deny pain. It refuses to be defined by it. When someone clings to victimhood, help becomes an enemy to their narrative because change threatens the comfort of blame. Helping without responsibility creates dependency. It trains people to wait instead of work, to expect instead of engage, to receive instead of rise. Over time, help becomes a substitute for growth. The person stays the same while the helper grows tired. That is not compassion, it is imbalance. Here's another hook. Responsibility activates dignity. When people take ownership, they regain their sense of agency. They no longer see themselves as helpless, but as capable. True help restores dignity by partnering with effort, not replacing it. Without responsibility, help quietly communicates, "You can't do this without me," and that message weakens the soul. God's pattern is clear. He provides direction, but people must take steps. He opens doors, but people must walk through them. He gives strength, but people must stand. When responsibility is ignored, help interferes with this divine rhythm. It disrupts the balance between grace and effort. Another hook that challenges the heart, rescuing irresponsible behavior rewards stagnation. When people experience benefits without effort, there is no incentive to change. Why grow when someone else keeps carrying the weight? Why mature when someone else keeps solving the problem? Responsibility creates pressure, but pressure produces progress. Personal responsibility also reveals sincerity. Anyone can ask for help, but not everyone is serious about change. Effort separates intention from commitment. Those who are ready will move, even if slowly. Those who are not will stall, even if supported endlessly. Here is a confronting hook. Help cannot fix what honesty refuses to face. Responsibility requires truth about habits, choices, patterns, and attitudes. Without truth, help operates in darkness. You cannot heal what someone keeps hiding behind excuses. God does not bypass responsibility because responsibility builds character. Character sustains blessing. When people want blessings without responsibility, they are asking for something they cannot maintain. That's why premature help can set someone up for future collapse. Another hook worth sitting with. Responsibility is the seed. Help is the water. Water without seed produces nothing. You can pour endlessly, but growth will never come. The seed must be planted first through choice, effort, and ownership. Helping someone who refuses responsibility also affects the helper. It breeds frustration, resentment, and burnout. The helper begins to feel used rather than useful. What started as compassion turns into obligation. This emotional erosion is often a sign that responsibility is missing on the other side. Responsibility shifts power back to the person who needs change. It tells them you have a role to play. It invites them into the process rather than keeping them dependent on rescue. God honors that posture because it reflects humility and courage. Another hook, when responsibility is embraced, even small help produces big change. A little guidance goes far. A small opportunity multiplies. A single word carries weight. But without responsibility, even great help produces nothing. Refusing responsibility is often rooted in fear. Fear of failure, fear of effort, fear of accountability. But growth always demands risk. Responsibility is the risk that unlocks reward. God does not assist avoidance. He partners with obedience. And obedience always begins with taking responsibility for where you are, how you got there, and what you are willing to do next. Wisdom has no power where it is not welcomed. And help becomes wasted energy when counsel is repeatedly ignored. Here's the hook that confronts the heart. Advice that is not received becomes noise. It may sound spiritual. It may sound right. But if it never reaches obedience, it never reaches effectiveness. Wisdom only works when it is applied. Until then, it is just information passing through unwilling ears. Another hook, many avoid. Asking for advice does not mean seeking change. Some people ask because they want comfort, not correction. They want affirmation, not adjustment. They want someone to agree with their feelings, not challenge their direction. When wisdom threatens their preference, they discard it while pretending to value it. Repeatedly rejecting counsel reveals resistance, not confusion. When someone hears the same truth over and over and still refuses to act, the issue is no longer clarity. It is submission. Wisdom demands humility. It requires the willingness to say, I don't know better. And many people struggle with that surrender. Here's a sharp hook. People who ignore wisdom often use advice as a delay tactic. They ask, listen, nod, and then do nothing. It creates the illusion of progress without requiring any movement. They feel productive because they talked, but nothing changes because they never obeyed. Wisdom always comes with responsibility. The moment counsel is given, accountability follows. That is why some people keep asking different voices until they find one that agrees with what they already want to do. They are not searching for truth. They are shopping for permission. Another hook that exposes the cycle. Repeated advice without obedience hardens the heart. Each ignored instruction makes the next one easier to dismiss. Over time, wisdom loses its weight. What once convicted now barely registers. This is how people drift. Not suddenly, but gradually through repeated refusal to apply what they already know. When wisdom is rejected, help turns into enablement. Instead of guiding someone forward, you end up supporting stagnation. You keep explaining the same principles, offering the same solutions, watching the same outcomes repeat. This repetition is a signal. Wisdom has been heard but not honored. Here's a confronting hook. Wisdom unheeded becomes judgment deferred. Truth ignored does not disappear, it waits. Consequences eventually teach what counsel was meant to prevent. Ignoring wisdom doesn't cancel its authority. It postpones its impact. God never intended wisdom to be decorative. It is functional. It is meant to shape decisions, redirect paths, and correct patterns. When people refuse to apply wisdom, they neutralize its power. Even the best advice cannot override a stubborn will. Another hook worth considering, listening is not the same as receiving. Many people hear with their ears, but reject with their choices. Reception I, proven by response. If behavior never changes, wisdom was never received. When someone consistently rejects counsel, continued advice becomes dishonoring to wisdom itself. Wisdom is valuable. It should not be thrown repeatedly at resistance. There comes a point when silence is wiser than speech and distance is more instructive than dialogue. Here's a deeper hook. Ignoring wisdom often protects pride. Obedience would require admission of error, change of direction, or surrender of control. Pride prefers repetition over repentance. It would rather relive the same problem than humble itself to follow instruction. Wisdom also requires patience, and many reject it because it doesn't offer instant relief. It often demands time, discipline, and sacrifice. People who want quick fixes will always resist wise solutions because wisdom builds long-term strength, not short-term comfort. Another hook that challenges motives. Some people value advice only as long as it supports their desires. The moment wisdom contradicts their plan, they label it outdated, irrelevant, or too hard. But truth does not change to accommodate preference. Repeated rejection of wisdom drains the helper. It creates frustration, emotional fatigue, and a sense of futility. This is not because the advice was wrong, but because it was never meant to be repeated endlessly without response. Wisdom thrives in obedience, not repetition. God gives wisdom to lead people forward, not to decorate conversations. When wisdom is ignored, continued help violates order. It places responsibility on the advisor instead of the hearer. The burden shifts, and that shift was never intended. Here's another hook. Wisdom rejected today becomes regret tomorrow. Most pain does not come from lack of information, but from refusal to act on what was already known. People rarely say, I didn't know. They say, I knew, but I didn't listen. Receiving wisdom requires courage. The courage to change, to confront habits, to break patterns. Without that courage, advice becomes a cycle of words without fruit. God does not force wisdom on anyone. He offers it, confirms it, and waits for response. When response never comes, help must pause, because wisdom cannot function where obedience is absent. Repeated rejection of counsel is not a call for more advice. It is a signal that the heart is not ready to obey. Correction is not cruelty. It is protection disguised as discomfort. Here's the hook. Many people resist. Anything you refuse to correct will eventually control you. Correction is one of the most misunderstood expressions of love because it challenges the ego before it heals the life. People love affirmation, but they fear adjustment. Yet growth never happens where correction is despised. Another hook that shakes the heart. Love that never confronts is not love, it is avoidance. True care is willing to risk misunderstanding in order to prevent destruction. Correction does not come to shame, it comes to shield. It exposes danger before damage becomes permanent. Those who resist correction often confuse it with rejection. They hear guidance as an attack and discipline as disrespect. But correction is not a statement about your worth. It is a warning about your direction. Refusing correction doesn't protect dignity. It jeopardizes destiny. Here's a revealing hook. Correction hurts because it touches what pride is protecting. Pride builds walls where wisdom tries to enter. It labels correction as negativity, judgment, or control. But the real issue is resistance to change. The pain of correction is not its intention. It is the friction between truth and ego. Correction is a mirror, not a weapon. It shows what is out of alignment before consequences expose it publicly. Those who welcome correction learn privately. Those who reject it are eventually corrected publicly by life itself. Consequences become the teacher when correction is ignored. Another hook worth sitting with, correction is cheaper than consequences. Correction costs humility. Consequences cost everything else. Ignoring instruction today may feel comfortable, but it creates a future far more painful than the moment of adjustment you tried to avoid. People who mock correction often believe experience alone will teach them. But experience without instruction is a brutal teacher. Wisdom shortens the learning curve. Correction saves time, energy, and regret. Rejecting it does not make someone strong, it makes them stubborn. Here's a confronting hook. Resistance to correction reveals insecurity, not strength. Secure people are teachable. They understand that growth requires feedback. Insecure people defend instead of develop. They protect their image at the expense of their progress. Correction is an act of investment. No one corrects what they don't care about. Silence is often a sign of indifference. When someone takes the time to speak truth, to point out error, to offer guidance, it means they see potential worth protecting. Mocking correction dishonors the investment. Another hook, correction exposes patterns before they become prisons. Small habits left uncorrected grow into destructive cycles. Correction interrupts momentum before it turns into damage. Ignoring it allows problems to mature into strongholds. Correction also requires trust. It demands the humility to believe that someone else may see what you can't. Blind spots exist for everyone. Refusing correction assumes self-sufficiency, but no one grows alone. Wisdom flows through community, accountability, and instruction. Here's a sharp hook. Mocking correction is often a defense mechanism. It uses humor, sarcasm, or dismissal to avoid conviction. But avoiding conviction doesn't remove truth. It only delays transformation. Correction does not exist to control behavior. It exists to shape character. Behavior can be modified temporarily, but character determines direction long term. When correction is rejected, character remains untouched, and the same behaviors resurface under new circumstances. Another hook that challenges the heart. Correction feels like loss before it feels like gain. It may require letting go of habits, relationships, or attitudes that feel familiar. Familiarity often feels safer than growth. But what feels safe may be what's holding you back. Those who despise correction often repeat the same mistakes with increasing frustration. They blame circumstances, people, or timing, never realizing the issue is uncorrected behavior. Correction would have redirected the path early. Resistance keeps them circling the same ground. Correction also preserves purpose. It keeps you aligned with where you are meant to go. Every meaningful calling requires refinement. Raw potential without correction becomes wasted potential. Correction sharpens what was dull and strengthens what was weak. Here's another hook. Correction is proof that growth is still possible. The moment correction stops, stagnation has begun. Instruction is a sign that there is still hope for progress. Silence often comes when correction has been repeatedly rejected. Correction demands maturity, and maturity is proven by response, not reaction. Reaction defends, response reflects. Reaction pushes back, response leans in. Those who grow ask, what can I learn? Instead of, why are you against me? Mocking correction also damages relationships. It closes the door to honest conversation. People stop speaking truth and start withholding concern. When correction is despised, connection weakens. Correction is not meant to humiliate, it is meant to elevate. It lowers pride so growth can rise. Without correction, progress becomes accidental instead of intentional. Another hook that reveals the cost: rejecting. Correction trades short-term comfort for long-term regret. The momentary relief of avoidance is replaced by prolonged frustration. Correction protects from self-sabotage. Many people don't fail because of lack of opportunity. They fail because uncorrected habits undermine every opportunity they receive. Correction interrupts self-destruction before it becomes identity. Those who embrace correction grow faster, wiser, and stronger. Those who resist it grow slower, harder, and more defensive. Correction is not an enemy to freedom. It is the pathway to it. Mocking correction does not make truth disappear. It simply removes guidance while leaving consequences intact. Kindness without boundaries doesn't stay kind for long. It turns into exhaustion, resentment, and regret. Here's the hook. Many generous people never hear until they're burned. Unlimited access will always lead to misuse. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. They are the guardians of it. When kindness is poured without limits, it stops being a gift and starts becoming an obligation. Another hook that challenges the heart. People don't abuse kindness because it's weak. They abuse it because it's unguarded. Generosity attracts need, but it can also attract entitlement. When kindness is consistently met with expectation instead of gratitude, a line has already been crossed. Boundaries define responsibility. They clarify where your role ends and another person's begins. Without boundaries, kindness absorbs responsibilities it was never meant to carry. You begin fixing what others should face, funding what others should manage, and solving what others should confront. What started as compassion quietly becomes compensation for someone else's unwillingness. Here's a confronting hook. Kindness without boundaries trains people how to treat you. When access is unrestricted, value is diminished. When yes is automatic, appreciation disappears. People rarely respect what they can always reach without cost. Boundaries protect purpose. Time, energy, resources, and emotional strength are finite. When kindness ignores limits, it drains what was meant for assignment. You begin giving from obligation instead of obedience. That shift changes everything. Obedience replenishes. Obligation depletes. Another hook worth sitting with: guilt is not guidance. Many people overextend kindness because they fear being seen as selfish, cold, or unloving. But fear-driven generosity creates imbalance. When kindness is fueled by guilt, it ignores wisdom and bypasses discernment. Boundaries also preserve dignity on both sides. They prevent the helper from becoming resentful and the receiver from becoming dependent. True kindness empowers. Boundaryless kindness entangles. Empowerment says you can grow. Entanglement says you can lean. Here's a sharp hook. Not everyone who receives kindness respects it. Some see generosity as an opportunity, not a blessing. They push limits, test patience, and stretch grace until it snaps. Boundaries stop kindness from being weaponized against the giver. Boundaries reveal motive. When limits are set, sincere need responds with understanding, while entitlement responds with offense. Offense often exposes expectation. When kindness is no longer convenient, true intention surfaces. Another hook that challenges emotion. Being available does not mean being inaccessible at all times. Access must be earned, not assumed. Constant access invites constant demand. Boundaries restore balance by controlling proximity. Kindness without boundaries also confuses roles. You start carrying emotional weights that are not yours. You absorb stress meant to drive someone else toward growth. Over time, this misplaced load produces burnout. Burnout is often the result of boundary violation, not lack of love. Here's a revealing hook. Boundaries do not reduce kindness, they refine it. They ensure that what you give is sustainable. Sustainable kindness lasts. Unsustainable kindness collapses. Boundaries also teach respect. When limits are clear, interactions become healthier. Expectations are managed. Communication improves. Resentment decreases. Without boundaries, kindness becomes silent pressure. Pressure to keep giving, keep fixing, keep absorbing. Another hook that exposes the cost. Generosity without limits creates silent anger. You smile while giving, but inside you feel used. That inner conflict erodes joy. Kindness was never meant to steal peace. Boundaries are not punishments, they are protections. They protect your time from being consumed, your heart from being drained, and your purpose from being delayed. They say, I care enough to be honest. Here's another hook. Saying no can be an act of love. It may feel harsh in the moment, but it can awaken responsibility, maturity, and self-reliance. Constant yes keeps people comfortable. Strategic no invites growth. Kindness without boundaries also distorts priorities. Urgent requests overshadow important assignments. Immediate needs replace long-term purpose. Boundaries restore alignment by ensuring that kindness flows in the right direction, not just the loudest one. Another hook that confronts identity. If your value comes from being needed, boundaries will feel threatening. But identity rooted in approval will always overgive. Identity rooted in purpose gives wisely. Boundaries require courage. They risk misunderstanding. They invite criticism. But clarity is kinder than confusion. Clear limits prevent future conflict. Unspoken limits guarantee it. Kindness must be intentional, not impulsive. Impulsive generosity reacts to emotion. Intentional generosity responds to wisdom. Boundaries slow you down long enough to choose well. Here's a powerful hook. Unlimited kindness teaches people to take. Bounded kindness teaches people to appreciate. Gratitude grows where limits exist. Boundaries also model healthy behavior. They show others how to manage relationships, time, and resources. They demonstrate that love can be strong without being soft, firm without being cruel. When kindness lacks boundaries, it loses direction. It spreads thin, weak, and ineffective. With boundaries, it becomes focused, impactful, and life-giving. Boundaries protect kindness from becoming bitterness. They ensure that generosity remains joyful instead of forced. They keep love from turning into obligation. Kindness must have limits, or it will be emptied by those who never intend to refill it. Blessings do not flow through desire alone, they flow through alignment. Here's the hook. Many people struggle to accept wanting something does not qualify you for it. Desire without obedience is noise in the spiritual realm. God does not respond to entitlement, he responds to alignment. When people pursue results while resisting the requirements that sustain those results, frustration is inevitable. Another hook that disrupts false expectations: favor is not random, it follows order. Blessings are not lottery prizes, they are outcomes of alignment with principles that govern life. When someone wants provision without discipline, success without submission, or increased wit, integrity, they are not seeking blessing, they are seeking exception. And God does not build lives on exceptions. Alignment means agreeing with God's way of doing things, even when it costs comfort. Obedience is not just about avoiding wrong. It is about actively choosing right. Many want the fruit, but avoid the root. They admire outcomes, but resist processes. Yet every blessing is connected to a principle, and every principle requires obedience. Here's a confronting hook. Entitlement turns prayer into demand. Instead of asking with humility, people approach God as if he owes them. They point to effort without alignment, activity without obedience, and wonder why nothing moves. God does not bless activity, he blesses alignment. Blessings also carry responsibility. They require character to maintain them. That's why obedience always comes before increase. God will not give you what will destroy you. When alignment is missing, blessing would become burden. What looks like delay is often protection. Another hook worth facing: obedience is the proof of trust. When people say they trust God but refuse to follow his order, their trust is theoretical, not practical. Real trust obeys even when it doesn't understand. Alignment says, I don't need to see the whole picture, take the next step. God's order is consistent. He doesn't change principles to match preference. People often want God to bless what they planned instead of aligning their plans with his will. That reversal creates tension. Alignment removes it. Here's another hook. Obedience is rarely convenient. It often conflicts with emotion, culture, or comfort. That's why many avoid it. But blessings attached to obedience carry peace. Blessings gained outside alignment carry anxiety. One sustains you, the other strains you. Alignment also involves timing. Doing the right thing at the wrong time can still produce resistance. Obedience includes patience. Many sabotage alignment by rushing outcomes. They want harvest without season. God's order honors timing because timing protects maturity. Another hook that challenges motives: some people obey selectively. They follow what benefits them and ignore what costs them. But partial obedience is still disobedience. Alignment is holistic. It touches habits, relationships, priorities, and attitudes. Entitlement often reveals itself in comparison. People see others blessed and assume they deserve the same outcome without the same alignment. But comparison ignores process. You don't see the obedience behind the blessing, the discipline behind the success, the sacrifice behind the favor. Here's a sharp hook. Blessings without alignment never last. They come fast and leave faster. Without obedience, there is no foundation. What is not built on order will collapse under pressure. God's order is not restrictive, it is protective. It guides decisions, guards relationships, and grounds progress. When people reject order, they invite chaos. Chaos always consumes blessing. Alignment requires surrender. It means yielding control. That is why entitlement resists it. Entitlement wants control without accountability. Alignment demands submission before promotion. Another hook worth considering. Obedience positions you for provision you cannot create yourself. Some doors only open when alignment is complete. Effort alone cannot force them. Alignment unlocks what strength cannot. God's blessings are not rewards for perfection. They are responses to obedience. People stumble, learn, and grow, but alignment keeps them moving forward. Entitlement stalls growth because it expects reward without adjustment. Here's another hook. Obedience clarifies identity. When you align with God's order, you stop chasing outcomes for validation. You start living from purpose instead of pressure. Blessing becomes overflow, not identity. Alignment also brings peace in waiting. When you know you are obedient, delay does not discourage you. You understand that timing is part of order. Entitlement grows restless. Alignment grows patient. Another hook that exposes the heart. Some people want blessing as proof of approval, but obedience is the proof. Blessing follows. It does not lead. God's order works even when it's unpopular. Obedience may separate you from trends, crowds, or comfort zones, but alignment always leads to stability. What you gain is worth what you leave. Alignment requires daily choices, not dramatic moments. Small obediences accumulate into great blessings. Small compromises erode alignment quietly. Entitlement ignores the small things. Alignment honors them. Here's a final hook to wrestle with. God will never bypass order to satisfy desire. Desire must submit to order to become destiny. Sometimes the most loving action is restraint, not rescue. That truth challenges everything people assume about care and compassion. Here's the hook that unsettles emotions. Stepping back can be an act of faith, not abandonment. Love does not always move forward. Sometimes it has the courage to pause. Sometimes love releases instead of rescues so that growth can finally begin. Another hook that confronts guilt. Allowing God to work through consequences does not mean you stop caring. It means you trust God more than your own ability to fix. Many people rush in because silence feels cruel and distance feels heartless. But distance can be the space where transformation happens. Stepping back requires faith because it removes you from the center of the process. It forces you to acknowledge that you are not the source of change. When you intervene too quickly, you replace divine work with human effort. Love that constantly. Rescues teaches people to depend on you. Love that steps back teaches people to depend on God. Here's a sharp hook. Rescue can become interference. Interference with accountability, interference with maturity, interference with lessons that pain was meant to teach. Consequences are not punishment, they are instructors. They clarify priorities, expose patterns, and develop discernment. When you interrupt consequences, you interrupt growth. Another hook worth facing, discomfort is not always the enemy. Some discomfort is necessary. It produces reflection. It slows impulsive behavior. It forces honesty. Removing discomfort too soon can keep someone trapped in the very cycle they claim to want to escape. Stepping back also protects you. Constant rescue drains emotional, spiritual, and mental strength. Over time, the rescuer becomes resentful while the rescued remains unchanged. This imbalance breeds frustration on both sides. Love was never meant to create bondage for the giver or dependency for the receiver. Here's a confronting hook. Doing everything for someone may feel loving, but it quietly communicates doubt. Doubt in their ability to grow, doubt in God's power to work. Stepping back communicates trust. Trust that growth is possible, and trust that God is active even when you are silent. Letting God work requires patience. It means accepting that transformation often takes longer than intervention. Quick fixes feel productive, but lasting change requires time. Stepping back allows space for reflection repentance, and responsibility. Another hook that challenges emotion, stepping back is not rejection, it is repositioning. It moves you from savior to supporter, from fixer to intercessor. You stop managing outcomes and start trusting process. That shift changes how you love. Consequences also reveal truth. When help is removed, motives surface, excuses fade, patterns become visible. Stepping back allows clarity. It exposes whether someone truly wants change or simply wants relief. Here's another hook. Some people only grow when support is reduced. Comfort can delay change. Pressure can accelerate it. Stepping back creates healthy pressure, not to harm, but to awaken. Stepping back requires humility. It acknowledges limits. It admits that you cannot carry someone else's responsibility. Humility accepts that God's methods may differ from yours, and his timing may feel uncomfortable. Another hook worth considering, love that never releases eventually controls. Control may look like care, but it restricts freedom. Stepping back restores autonomy. It gives people the dignity of choice and the weight of consequence. Stepping back also refines relationships. It separates connection from codependence. Healthy relationships allow space for growth. Unhealthy ones collapse under constant rescue. Distance, when guided by wisdom, can heal what closeness damaged. Here's a sharp hook. Stepping back feels risky because it removes immediate reassurance. You no longer see quick improvement. But faith does not require visible progress. It requires trust in unseen work. Allowing God to work also involves prayer replacing pressure. When you stop intervening, you start interceding. You shift energy from fixing to trusting. Prayer does what control never can. Another hook, stepping back may be misunderstood. Others may judge your restraint as indifference. But obedience often looks like indifference to those who equate love with action. Faith sometimes chooses stillness over movement. Stepping back teaches boundaries. It defines what you can and cannot carry. It clarifies roles. You support without suffocating. You care without controlling. Here's another hook that exposes motive. If stepping back feels like losing identity, it may be because, say, rescuing became your role. Letting go challenges that identity. It invites you to find worth beyond being needed. Stepping back also allows consequences to speak louder than advice. Words can be ignored. Experiences cannot. Consequences translate truth into reality. Another hook worth holding, growth often begins where help ends. When safety nets are removed, strength is discovered. Stepping back creates room for resilience to form. Stepping back does not mean closing your heart. It means opening space for God's work. It is an act of surrender, not withdrawal. True love wants transformation, not just comfort. And transformation often requires distance, patience, and trust. Stepping back is not the absence of love. It is love expressed through faith.